Welcome. Welcome and welcome back. It's a great pleasure for me to be here again with you in Montreal, and especially with my guest this evening, Brandon Taylor. I will give you a very short introduction, and then we'll speak, and there'll be a few minutes at the end for questions. Brandon Taylor was born in Alabama 36 years ago. His debut novel, Real Life, was shortlisted for the UK's Booker Prize, the US National Book Critics Circle Award, and it was a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice. The central character from Alabama is the only Black student in his graduate program in biochemistry at a midwestern university. Here he encounters racism and struggles with his own desire to escape his past. Taylor's work is frankly autobiographical, but it's not memoir. His latest novel, Minor Black Figures, is a vivid portrait of friendship, creativity, cultural politics, and love set in the New York art world. In his writing, there is depth of experience and awareness alongside the sheer beauty of his prose. What one critic called a seductive intellectual energy. I thought I could go for that.
It's my favorite thing.
It could be a good tag. I'm delighted to welcome Brandon Taylor.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be in Montreal. It's my first time. Oh, thanks.
They already love you.
I love them. I love them already. I should move here. Yeah.
You were born and raised on a farm near Montgomery, Alabama. When you recall your childhood there, what kind of images come to mind?
Pine trees. We had a lot of pine trees. So I think of trees first and foremost, and I think of our fields. I think of growing things. I guess I think a lot about nature, which I guess makes sense for a farm. And I think about how broad the sky was as well. There weren't a lot of very tall buildings. And so I think about wide horizons and tall trees and deep furrows of canyons and gullies and stuff. And I also think a lot about rusted farm equipment. We had a lot of broken equipment lying around. And so I think a lot about those things. I guess those are the things that come first and the most vivid. And then I guess other things come after that, I guess, in flashes, because it was far out in the middle of nowhere, there wasn't a lot of light at night. So we had only a couple of very tall lights on very tall poles. And so there were these pockets of orange light amid this sort of deep forest dark. And so there were these pockets of light where these fat frogs would hang out at night. They would hide in the sand during the heat of the day, and at night they would crawl out. And so I think a lot about those frogs, actually, and throwing rocks at them to see if they would hop. So I think about frogs, but mostly it is nature, I think.
You grew up in a very religious Baptist family. Can you tell me a bit about them?
Yeah, incredibly I mean, the sort of religious that feels a lot more like superstition, I suppose. We went to church 3 or 4 times a week. And so there was the sort of formal religion of it, the sort of reading the Bible and doing Bible study. But I guess the most intense aspect of my family's religious beliefs had to do with their belief that God was in everything, and I do mean everything. So I remember when we had thunderstorms during the summer, we would have to turn out all of the lights and sit in total darkness, not speaking, so that God could do his work. And there was this fear that if we spoke, that we would be speaking against God's work and his will, and we would be inviting his anger, and he might strike us with lightning. So we'd sit in the house and sweat a lot during because you couldn't open the window because that might also let God in. And so there was this, on the one hand, a belief in God in a sort of intellectual sense, but there was also just a really visceral, lived experience to that as well. but that also meant that they had a very severe and brutal view of the world where everything you did was calculated for maximum favor from the Almighty. They had a really strict moral code, a really strict behavioral code, and anything you did wasn't just bad, it was bad because it was spitting in God's eyes. So if you talked back to your mom, it wasn't bad because it was rude. It was bad because it contravened God's orders in the Bible to obey and honor your parents. And so everything just felt like, you couldn't do anything without making God angry or disappointing God. And so everything had a very steep price.
What effect do you think that had on you? I mean, I read somewhere that you were exorcised.
Oh, yes.
By your family when you told them you were agnostic.
Oh, yes, because...
How old were you?
Let's see, I must have been about 12 or 13 because that's when I found out what agnostic meant. And it seemed like a soft way to peddle this fact that I had stopped believing in God, because I stopped believing in God very, very young because it was just too much stress to keep believing in somebody that was spying on me that much. I think, the way that it manifested when I was very, very young is that from the age of like 4 or 5, I started having really intense night terrors about being dragged into hell. And God became this place that was never happy or safe. It became a place of constant fear and trepidation. And so then I thought, other people are not living like this. Like it must not have to be this hard for everybody. So I just stopped believing in God. And as a way of trying to like explain that to my family, I told them that I was agnostic, that like I believed in something, I just didn't know what it was. And I said this at a family barbecue and they laid hands on me and like tried to exorcise the spirit of doubt out of this young boy. Like it was because there was this real, again, because God was so viscerally real to my family, their fear for my soul was like immediate, urgent, and visceral as well. It wasn't an abstract thing to them. So they really thought I was like putting my soul at jeopardy. But they also felt that way if I was disobedient or talked back or did whatever. So it was like my soul was on the line every single day. And you can imagine that that's just like a lot of weight for a 13-year-old to carry around.
And when you told your parents about your nightmares, what would they do?
Oh, this is another thing about my family that's like incredibly weird. They don't like hearing about people's dreams. They think that hearing about someone's dream is you trying to put a spell on them. So I would tell them that I'm having these dreams about being cast into hell, and they would be like, well, that's the devil working on you, and don't tell me about it because I don't want him to come into my dreams and drag me into hell. And so to them, they weren't dreams, they were prophecies. And they also didn't want to hear about it because to tell someone your dream was to make them also susceptible to the same malevolent spirits that were inhabiting you. So it was like being in a horror movie, honestly. Like looking back at it, like it was actually deeply irrational and like insane.
Well, I don't know if you were joking or you just once mentioned that you felt you had been raised by wolves.
I did feel that way. I feel that way now. And looking back at it, I was raised by these people who, any sign of weakness, any sign of like vulnerability, or any sign of like showing your belly was an invitation for violence and for harm. I feel like I would go to school and just not know how to operate in polite society because my family was not like a family that operated according to any of the rules that the sort of outside world operated by. And so it did feel like whenever I went to school, and even later when I went away to college and then later to grad school, I found myself just having to learn how to be in society because the world I had been raised to inhabit, my family world, just like it was so far from any kind of normalcy. And so I do feel like I was raised by wolves. I feel like I was raised out in the jungle.
Because as you've described it, your mother was illiterate and your father was legally blind. So you were the house's designated reader.
Yes.
What did that mean?
Oh, yes. So I mean, a lot people who are literate, people who can read, they often don't think about all of the tasks in their lives that revolve around reading. So like going to the pharmacy, going to the doctor, paying your bills, all of these tasks require some degree of literacy. And so anytime a bill came to the house, I was the one in charge of reading it and relaying the information to my parents. Anytime my parents went to the doctor and came back with a prescription with doctor's instructions on it, I had to read that. I was in charge of relaying all of my progress reports to my parents because they couldn't read them.
Did you make them up?
No, I got really good grades. I was really good in school. And indeed, I once got in trouble because my brother was not good at school, and I was also in charge of reading his progress reports. And he would get so mad because I wouldn't.
You would shift.
No, not at all. Not at all. He would get so mad at me. And so I was the person sort of allowing my family to sort of correspond with the outside world. And it wasn't just my mom and my dad, but also my grandparents and my aunts and my uncles, because we lived on a sort of like extended family compound. And so I was the little boy, like, why is an 8-year-old reading instructions for your antibiotics? Like, it's, but because I was also a voracious reader, it was fine because I would have been reading it anyway. It would have been.
Yeah. How did you become a voracious reader?
I think I became a voracious reader sort of by accident. My family didn't have a lot of books. And the few books we did have were all sort of mechanical and necessary for work. My dad's only sister could read, and she was a nursing assistant, and she had these nursing home manuals, and I taught myself to reading those in her romance novels. And it just became a thing to do because I wasn't I wasn't very fast, and I was the youngest of my sort of cousins and my brother, and so they would often run into the woods and leave me behind. And so I would be at home, and one of the few things I could do was like read. And at first it was any label I could get my hands on, reading all the sort of labels on all of the canned goods in my grandma's pantry. And then later it became romance novels and nursing manuals. And then later textbooks. I was the kid reading the textbooks even before I got to kindergarten and could get books from the school library. I was like reading my brother's textbooks for fun. So I don't know where it came from, but I was hungry for words. I couldn't get enough.
What did you make of? I mean, you've talked about the lack of warmth and affection in your family. What effect do you think that kind of withholding had on you?
I think it's been twofold in my life. I think on the one hand, it means that I don't take familial relationships for granted. I don't take really any human relationship for granted. And so anytime I encounter a new social situation, I'm kind of solving it in real time as if for the first time. It means that I don't have a lot of the sort of baked in assumptions that a lot of other people have for social relation, which is, on the one hand, kind of a lonely way to live life, but it's also like a really great way to live life if you're a writer, because it means that everything that everyone else thinks is really boring is kind of novel to you. Like the first time you hold someone's hand, or like, this question of like, how do people who are falling in love know that they are falling in love? Like, what are the things that people say to each other when they're falling in love? Like, I think for many people, they don't have that question. Like for many people, they don't go through life wondering like, well, like, what do you say to someone when you are falling in love with them? For them, it's just like this organic process by which it happens. But for me, I'm like, well, what do you say when you're falling in love with someone? What do they say to you? How do you know? How do you decide to live together? How do you decide that you're going to be together? Those are the sort of questions that I have, which are like almost childlike questions in a way.
But you didn't draw on books or movies as your...
I mean, I did in some ways, but I think I also as a child just had a native suspicion of narrative. I think like, I thought, well, that's a movie, but like, what do people say in real life? Like, I think as a child, I was always aware of the sort of distance between what I saw on screen and what I saw in real life, in part because there was such a huge discrepancy between what mommies and daddies did on screen and what I saw my own parents do. So I knew natively that like there are other possibilities or possible configurations out there. And so I never had this sense that like what I saw on TV or books were like the main thing. But it is true that a lot of my early socializing was me repeating things from books and movies because I thought that's where you say the thing. And then people looking at me like I was an alien. I'd be like, and this is where the friends make up. And they'd be like, you have to apologize. So I think a lot of my socializing is from books. The structures are, but I'm still really curious about, in the moment, person to person, how do people figure it out? I don't know. So I write books.
In your latest novel, Minor Black Figures, the central character, Wyeth, comes from the South. He recalls being forced to pray in a shed built by his grandfather, a lay preacher. And the shed becomes a kind of metaphor in the story. Was there a shed in your own childhood?
Was there a shed? I don't know that there was.
I mean, a place you would have wanted to escape.
Oh, yeah, I think for sure. And that was like the farm. I think I wanted to get out of the farm. But I think for me, I think the South became a kind of catch-all for a lot of the things that I found really restricting and really limiting. And so whenever someone would ask, like, what do you want to get away from? I would say the South, but really the South contained a lot of things, and it was my family, and it was the way that they made me feel small, and it was the feeling of personal limitation, like I couldn't express who I really wanted to be, and it was feeling like the worst possible person, in a group. And so I think the South became, in a way, like the shed. But I think just on a sort of like daily basis, there were many sheds I wanted to escape. Although I had, like as a child, I had this intense sense of always being stuck places, like going to go visit my aunts in Verbena, which was like a 45-minute drive one way. And I'd just be stuck there, having to sit with these people I had nothing in common with, while they just, like my cousins would be watching football, and my dad and uncles would be playing dominoes, and they'd be drinking beer and dancing. And I'm just like, I just want to read the new Harry Potter book. Like I just, and all the times I'd be sitting around reading, and my family would literally take the book from my hand and say, why are you doing that? Like, stop doing that. Go do something real. Like, go do something that you're supposed to do. And so I think a lot of that I wanted to escape, but there was no one shed. So I gave it to that character too. I gave him a shed.
You gave him a shed.
I gave him a shed. Yeah.
I mean, as you were saying, like through education, you did find a path away from the South, leaving home to study science at nearby Auburn University near Montgomery, and then to graduate school in Madison, Wisconsin, and then later changing direction to the Iowa Writers Workshop in Iowa City, and now since 2022 living in New York City. Through all these moves, you said, now you may want to change what you've said, because I was skeptical reading this, that how deeply Southern you were. I mean, what did you mean by that?
Oh, I still feel that way, Eleanor. I feel that way more and more every day. I feel that way. And I think in part because this is something that Mavis Gallant said in her story when we were nearly young, where she was something like, your innate character emerges when you're against an unfamiliar backdrop. There's this woman who goes to Barcelona, and she thought that she would fit in because they were also kind of these outre, cool bohemians. And then she realized how actually deeply provincial she was, how deeply Canadian she actually was. Not that Canadians are provincial. That was her words, not mine. You know her how she is. You know how she was. She's your girl. But that she realized that she was actually like deeply spiritually Canadian, and she only realized that when she was in Madrid, I believe it was actually. And I do feel that way, especially in New York, and I feel it more and more keenly every day. In part because, like in New York, they talk over you, and they don't feel bad about it, and New Yorkers are incredibly rude, and they don't have an intense visceral shame of their rudeness in a way that Southerners do. And so I realize that I'm a person with like deeply Southern manners when I'm in New York City. Like they are so rude. They are so rude. And their values are so counter to anything that comes natural to me. And so, yeah, I mean, it is true that like when I was in the South, I was like, I can't wait to leave this place. They're so backward. They're so regressive. Why do I have to say yes, ma'am, no, ma'am all the time? Like, I should be able to be my own self. And now that I'm in New York City, I'm like, a little decorum, please. You barbarians, a little decorum, please. I feel so prim when I'm in when I'm in New York. I feel like if I'd stayed in the South, I would never have known that about myself. I would never have known it had I not left.
Although I think you once said that Southerners are always exiles, even when they're at home.
I think that's also probably true, in part because the South is not a real place. I think the Southerners are always pining for a version of the South that is always just over the hill behind them. It's also never in the future. It's always a thing that must be reclaimed or returned to. And so Southerners are by nature always yearning to return. And I think like that's one of the reasons that I'm really drawn to the work of this author, Andre Aciman, who wrote Call Me By Your Name, but he also wrote this wonderful memoir called Out of Egypt and a collection of essays called False Papers. It's all about exile and memory. And he writes a lot about how the Jewish condition is one of exile, and it's one of sort of nostalgia for return in a lot of ways. And reading those, I mean, I am not Jewish, but reading those essays, I recognized a lot of my own sort of Southern predicament in them, this sort of constant yearning for a return. Not that I wanted to return to the antebellum days, but that the South is a place where memory predominates. And I think that any culture where memory predominates like that is a culture of exile for the most part.
It's a very interesting. I'm familiar with this work. I interviewed him a couple of times, but the idea that returning to, but I still don't get how you would be nostalgic for what you've just described.
For all of the horrors. I mean, but I think maybe, Eleanor, like I am nostalgic for manners, and I'm nostalgic for people not interrupting me when I'm talking and bars in New York City. Like the pace of life is also totally different. And sometimes when I talk to New Yorkers, it's like they don't have souls in their eyes in a way that, like, with Southerners, there's like a deadness there, but it's like an intellectual deadness. Like there's an intellectual deadness, but not a spiritual deadness in Southerners. But I think ultimately, what I am nostalgic for is a context where I don't have to explain myself. And in a way, when I was in the South, the part of myself that I found inexplicable felt like the true version of myself. So like my queerness and like my desire to read and be sort of atypically masculine in the context of my family. And now that I'm out of the South, what I yearn for is somebody who gets what I mean when I say that I really craved boiled peanuts and they know exactly what it tastes like, or that I sort of really miss eating porch watermelon, like watermelon that grows out of the slats in the porch. People who know what honeysuckle is and maypops and roadside wild berries and stuff like that. I miss not having to explain what kudzu smells like, and so I think like now that I'm in a place that understands my queerness and my literary sort of aspects, I now feel that the part of me that was real is all the stuff that I had to leave behind. But I do think that that's just, the grass is always greener. like you're always looking over your shoulder, right, for that thing that you left behind. But yeah, I really do miss boiled peanuts. There's a stand that will ship them to you, and I have been thinking about it. I've had them in my cart on this website for months. But then the shipping, it's a whole thing. Yeah.
Minor Black Figures is your first novel to be set in New York City, which you've called home for the past 4 years. Your previous fiction was set in the Midwest. And I was going to ask you, what's it like for you to live in New York? But how does it give you a different perspective? I mean, being in New York in terms of setting your fiction there.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm just the sort of person who can only write about like where I live. I'm accepting that about myself. That it's I live in New York. I know New York, but at the same time, it's like really dangerous to write a book about New York because New Yorkers really care about their city. Not that Midwesterners don't care about their cities, but there are more New Yorkers. And they are louder and they have more and bigger newspapers to yell about the job that you're doing writing about their city. So it's more ominous. It would be like writing a book about Montreal. Like I just feel like they would know, they would get all this, they would point out all the streets I got wrong. But writing about New York, I mean, the weird thing about it is when I started this book, I was actually in Paris. I was in Paris and I was thinking like I need to write a book because I had just thrown out a book that I had spent 5 years on. And that book was going to be set in the Midwest. Mm-hmm. And I had gone to the Midwest before I threw it out on book tour for The Late Americans, my last novel. And I went back to Madison, which is where the book I was supposed to write was set. And I had this heartbreaking realization that the reason I couldn't write that book was because I didn't live in Madison anymore. And that in order to write that book, I would have to come back to Madison and live there and like be among the people and to sort of reacquaint myself with like the concerns of the people and like what they talked about and how they talked and how they moved and how they felt and how the light moved over the lake. And I was like, I don't want to do that. So I threw that book out and I was like, okay, I need to write about New York. But the problem was at the time I had to write the book, I was in Paris. And so I was like, I can't write about New York right now, but I can write about New York in 2023, 2022. Because I had taken all of these photographs. I had this huge tranche of images of New York. And so that's in part why the book is set when it is, because
the summer of 2022.
Yeah, because I had all these photographs, these film photographs of when I had first moved to the city. And that's also why Wyeth is sort of new to the city in the book, because it felt like I needed to set the book not only during a particular time, but like during a particular time during a character's life, like new to the city. So he's seeing it in all of these ways that are novel and new. And so I could use the feelings I'd had then to write the book. And so in some ways, like I can only write about a place where I live, but I can only write about it from a very particular psychic distance. I've got to like get it right because otherwise it'll just feel like mushy and vague.
But Wyatt, the central character in your novel, is a struggling visual artist. And he shares a studio with some other young artists, and he works part-time both for an art restorer and also at a gallery. Why did you want to set this book, the story, in the art world?
Yeah, so my previous book was about this, like, it was like this group novel of people living in Iowa City, and there was a poet, and there were dancers, and there was a guy who worked in a meatpacking plant. But I set myself this task of like not, like having a very severe, very restricted palette of things I would let myself write about. And by the time I came out of that exercise, I just really wanted to describe stuff again. Like I really wanted to be able to describe things. And I thought one way I can justify describing things is to make the character a painter, because then I'll be able to sort of create all of these tableaux and I'll be able to sort of create all of these images. And plus, if he's a painter, I'll get to smuggle in descriptions of art. And in the book, Wyeth is a painter who paints scenes from movies, but he paints Black people into them.
Yeah, you have to elaborate on that.
Oh, so Wyeth's artistic project is that he's sort of like a history painter or a genre painter where he paints scenes from European cinema, so like Bergman films or Romer films or Cukor films, and he, instead of the sort of central characters from the film stills, he interposes Black figures. He sort of paints Black figures into them. And they're not people he knows. They're just sort of figures he's making up. And so you might say it's a riff on some of Kehinde Wiley's stuff, where he's sort of taking the old European tradition and infusing Black figures into it. And so that's his project. And part of why that's his project is because I wanted to like write about Romer movies and I wanted to write about these films I really love and that I was watching a lot of. And so much of this book is erected out of my own desire to sort of do things I enjoy. So like that's why he's a painter partly. And also I wanted to write about a priest. So like that's why the love interest is a priest. in part because I also wanted to write a lot about God. And I feel like anytime I want to do something in a book, I need a justification for it. And so often it results in a choice I've made about the character's life.
And so Eric Romer is one of the filmmakers and films that he draws on. Also Bergman's Winter Light.
Yes. Yes, I love that movie so much. It's such a disturbing movie. Do you guys know this movie, Winter Light? It's not one of the sort of most famous ones, but it's about this priest in a small Swedish village, and he's sick, but he's also sort of losing his faith. And a fisherman comes up to him and says, the fisherman's wife is like, he's not well, like he's really nervous, and the fisherman is like quite anxious about nuclear annihilation by China. Like he's like quite worried about the end of the world. And he's like, I feel like God is dead. And the priest is like, me too. I also feel like God is kind of missing from the world. Is that so bad? Like, is it so bad to feel that way? And the fisherman, after that, the fisherman goes and kills himself and is found by a riverside. And the priest then has to deal with the fallout of that. And it's such a spare movie. It's such an intense movie, a sort of quietly intense movie. And I found that movie like really, really powerful and really moving. And so what Wyeth does in the book is that he paints it, but he paints it with two Black men. And for him, he's exploring this question of like spiritual unease. And he has this thought that like in the history of Black painting, no one really paints Black figures as a way of exploring questions of spiritual doubt or unease. And so he posts it online, but it's during the summer of 2020. So everyone thinks that it's about George Floyd and about, the sort of, that there's a racial aspect to it. And he's very confused by this. But then it precipitates a huge windfall for him that allows him to move to New York City. And so he's asking this question of like, I wasn't trying to do a race painting. Does it matter if I was trying to do a race painting? Is any painting I do a race painting? Like, will I ever be free to have my own subjectivity? I think in many ways, like that is the question at the heart of the book. Like, are Black artists entitled to their own subjectivity? And if so, like, what does that subjectivity look like? Are there ways to push back against it? Is anything a Black artist, does like automatically either for or against or with or through the white gaze? Like, is it possible for the Black artist to be entirely unmediated? And if so, what might that look like? And it's this sort of intense, quiet struggle at the heart of the book and at Wyeth's heart as well, I think.
And is it yours too? I mean, it's not necessarily the predicament of a visual artist.
No, I mean, no, it's not just the predicament of a visual artist. And in fact, like one of the ways that like any time that anyone wants to dismiss Black art, whether the critic is Black or white or whatever, one way to dismiss Black art is to say that it's for the white gaze, like that it's for white people, as though that completely delegitimates the art that the artist is making, and it also presupposes that the artist's intent and what they're doing. And so it is a question that I have about my own work, and it's a thing that people say about my own work, that I'm wrestling too much with whiteness, even though I'm not thinking about white people at all.
But in your earlier novels, set in the Midwest, you have, as I mentioned in my little introduction, you have a white character who is maybe the only white character in his social sphere, and has to deal with that. So it's like you've inserted a Black figure into a white scene.
Yes. Well, I mean, with my earlier work, I mean, especially with real life, I considered what I was doing to be taking the form of the campus novel, which is a genre I really love, and putting a Black person in it, because nobody had done that before. There were no campus novels about Black people, and yet there were so many Black people on campuses, myself included. And I often feel like that I find myself in white spaces or spaces where I'm the only Black person. I mean, it's not the totality of my life, but it's a thing that happens to me sometimes. And I feel like to say that I can't make art about that is, which some people do say that I shouldn't make any art about that. I'm like, well, that's just so silly. Like, that's so silly. It's like saying don't make art about going to the dentist. I mean, sure, maybe that's boring if you're bad at doing it. like bad art is bad art. Like, it's not subject matter that makes art bad. It's bad art is bad because the artist is bad at doing it. So, well, that was kind of mean. I didn't mean it as a mean thing, but it is true. I stand by it.
But those accusations trouble you? I mean, when you're...
I mean, they used to. They used to trouble me. But now I'm just like, they're saying they're expressing a thing that for them is true, which has nothing to do with my motivations for making art and have nothing to do with my art actually. It's just their inference about me. I consider it a form of fan fiction, like they're making fan fiction about me and my motives. But yeah, it used to bother me, especially because I'm a person who hates to be misperceived. It really grinds my gears when people say things about me that are not true. And I really want to be like, oh, no, you only feel that way because you don't understand. Let me correct the record. And I've had to have friends like gently take my phone away from me and say, Brandon, you can't argue with people who are determined to misread you. You have to let them misread. And the idea that there are people out there misreading me does sometimes keep me up at night. It's just like, if I could just like fix it, just like that one, if we just like do that one little correction, they'll get it. And it's like, no, let it go. Let that be a message to all of you. Let go. Let them misread. Not your problem.
As an artist, Wyatt doesn't want to compromise himself, and it's in a climate where it's so easy to be compromised, particularly in the art world, I think, but maybe in any artistic endeavor. So, can you talk a bit about that, about this issue of being compromised?
Yeah. I mean, I think I especially felt this during 2020, where there were these, I think, like really necessary reckonings around race and inequity and justice happening all across the world, especially in America. And these editors kept sliding into my inbox asking me if I had op-eds for them, or like, do you want to write about the climate we're in? And I just kept thinking, like, you should maybe be speaking to a sociologist or speaking to someone who has been doing this work for decades. Like, surely you know many, many scholars who have been working in these fields. Why would you want me, a simple gay novelist, to write you an op-ed for the front page of the New York Times about social injustice? Like, all I know is how I feel. You know, I don't have books and stats for you. And it was this thing where I felt like I was being asked to fulfill a function, and I was being offered a ton of compensation for it, but it felt like to do that would have been to obey a logic that was at its heart kind of evil, and would have been a kind of giving away my soul to a machine. And I think that many artists, as you say, like many artists today, like there are many people willing to stick a microphone in front of you and ask you to say things that you may or may not truly believe, just because your face is the right color or your gender is the right thing, or you fit certain markers. And if you are in a desperate enough pinch, you might do it because you need money, right? Like, it's really hard out there right now. And I think for Wyeth in the book, you know, he has these principles, these really strict principles that he hopes to live by. And then there's the fact that he's got student loans and he's got rent to pay and he's got to feed himself. And so when that misreading of that painting happens and someone offers him money, and he's like, do I take this money and sort of legitimize this misreading of the work? Or do I refuse it and sort of stand by my principles? You know, and I think like he makes a concession in that moment. But then he spends the rest of the book turning it over. Like, have I betrayed myself? Is it possible to betray myself? For what would I betray myself?
And the next time that he's tempted, he doesn't necessarily.
Well, he's been through the whole length of the book, and he's got this moment of like, he's offered something like an even more brutal form of selling out. He's offered in the book. I won't tell you guys what it is. It's a secret. But he's offered a chance to sell out. And then it's sort of like, okay, having had all of these experiences, what am I going to do? This could be really big for me. It could be really major for me. Do I give in, you know? And I think the book is also interested in this question of like, I think for many people, they're like, yeah, my principles are the most important thing. But I think it's important that the book forced Wyeth to ask himself, like, okay, but do those principles come from an inherently like disinterested place? like, are those principles good principles to have actually? And so there are moments where he isn't sure if the things that he feels so strongly about are even the right things to feel that strongly about, which was fun to do, to torture him, to make him doubt himself in fun ways.
Well, he's very self-questioning. and I know where he gets it from.
Yeah.
So, I mean, your novel Minor Black Figures is both an intimate portrait of the artist and also a wider portrait of the society that surrounds him at a particular recent moment, the summer of 2022, a post-pandemic world. And before I ask you to elaborate more about that moment, but one of the many things I appreciate in your novel is your referencing the devastation of COVID.
Mm.
1 million deaths in the US alone, many, many millions more around the world. Why do you think it hasn't exactly been forgotten, but its impact so little discussed?
I think a few things about it. I think one, the scale of the loss is so immense that it's hard for people to imagine it, right? Like it's hard for them to hold it in their minds and to like do anything with it, like emotionally or viscerally. It just feels so immense that it's just hard to get your head around it. And I think when it's a devastation that huge that you do sort of want to forget it very quickly. You do want to sort of move on. I think another part of it, at least in the States, I can't speak for the wonderful Canadians, but in America, there was also like a concerted effort to, okay, that's it, dust ourselves off and move on. Like dust ourselves off and move on. When in fact, like whole neighborhoods were just ransacked by this virus, by this disease, by this horrible calamity. Like it completely reconfigured the texture of reality. Like it was enormous. And I feel like in some ways, like, I mean, maybe this isn't true, but I feel like it is true that like, I don't know a single person who didn't lose someone or didn't know someone who lost someone. You know, it touched all of us. And I think when it's something like that, like it's hard to sort of get your hands around the scale of it. And I think it's that, and also just the fact that we're in a culture of expediency and moving on. And the longer we dwell in it, the longer we grieve it. It's almost like people think that the longer we sit in that, the longer it'll take to get over it. When in fact, it's like, how are we going to learn anything from it if we don't, sort of let it take up its proper scale?
Because, I mean, this is quoting from the novel. You said you could not let yourself think of the millions who had died during the pandemic, the mass casualties that had totally upended world order, and it was somehow a sign of resilience. But then he goes on to reflect, but really it came from a deep moral or spiritual sickness. They had perfected the act of looking away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's not just with that either, right?
Well, that exactly, and that the act of looking away crops up elsewhere in your novel in very immediate ways. When Wyeth encounters the unhoused and just other situations and watches the world.
Yeah. Yeah, in some ways I wanted it to be a book that was filled with the things that we try our hardest not to see when we're walking on the street, Of course, New York is a beautiful city. There's Central Park. It's so glorious. And early in the book, it is like a beautiful city, And then as the book goes on, we see more and more at higher and higher resolution, more of those things that people often don't see, or the things that they crop out of their images. And it just felt
literally.
Yes, that's right.
Because Wyeth is also a photographer spends some time taking photos, and you could describe it because he edits as he.
Yeah,
what he's doing.
Wyeth has this. I mean, those of you with iPhones, perhaps this will be familiar to you. When he takes a picture, Wyeth immediately begins editing it because he wants to revert it back to what he saw before the sort of on phone processing, like edited the photo. Like when you take a photo and then you look away and then you look back at it and it doesn't quite look how it looked the second you took it. So Wyeth is quite anal in this way. So when he takes a photo, he immediately starts editing it. And one of his friends in the book says, "Why are you doing that?" And he says, "Well, I'm editing it to make it look more natural." And his friend is like, "You're editing it to make it look more natural?" And he's like, "Yeah, what's wrong with that?" And it's this question of like,
what's real?
What's real? And I've seen the iPhone processing happen like in real time. Like I take the photo and then I see it like change it a little bit. And I'm like, I don't like that. Put it back.
You've described Minor Black Figures as a novel with deep spiritual concerns. And questions of faith arise in discussions between Wyeth and an attractive and unusual guy he develops a romantic relationship with named Keating. Who is Keating? How did he find his way into your story?
Oh, Keating. Keating. He's a tall, blonde, hot guy who Wyeth meets at a bar one night, and they flirt somewhat badly, and then they spend the summer sort of walking and talking about God and other things they do. And I think in part he ended up in the book because at the start of every book, I make a list of stuff I want to put in the book. And so it was like painter, movies, Jesuit. Because I've been reading about Jesuits for about 3 years for absolutely no reason. And I decided, I'm like, now it's time for me to write. Time for me to put a Catholic in this book. I'm going to stick a Catholic in this book. And so I was like, he's got to be a priest. He's going to be a Jesuit. And he's going to be at a sort of crossroads with his faith. And when I was nervous about that because I am not a Catholic, but I did accidentally go to a Catholic conference. And
you accidentally went
to
a Catholic conference?
I was invited to a conference on the work of René Girard. And it was held at American University. No, was it American University or was it Liberty University? It was some university in DC that turns out is a Catholic university. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like all these Catholics are around. And then there was like at the ending brunch, there was like in full-on garb, a priest, like in full-on cassock, and he had like one of the purple things. And and I was like, a stole, I believe, I don't know. And I was like, oh my God, like a Catholic guy. And he goes, and then a friend's like, Brandon, this guy's a Jesuit. He's because my friend knew. And I was like, can I ask you some stuff for my novel? And he said, sure. And so over ham and eggs, we're talking. And I sort of tell him that, there's a character in the book and he was a Jesuit, but then like during the pandemic, he had all this anxiety about God and this faith, about the losses. And it's a book that in part is about like a crisis of faith that this painter's having, but it's really about like also a crisis of faith that this Jesuit guy is having. And I sort of gave him my whole spiel, and he's like, more people should write about this. Yeah. This is a real concern. And we find that our young brothers often go through the like periods of crisis like this. And he's like, that's really quite good. Yeah, you should continue writing it. And then we started talking about the 30 Years' War anyway. And so then I was like, okay, so this random Catholic priest said that I should write it, that I have permission to write about it.
Did you mention the gay romance?
No, I didn't mention that. But many of my friends in New York are gay Catholics, and I will say that their review was the one I was most anxious about, but they gave me raves, so I was really, really happy about it. Didn't mention the whole gay part, though. But every other person that I've spoken to about that has been like, yes, the Jesuits are really gay. They are kind of like that. And in fact, my Spanish translator is gay and is married to a former Jesuit. And so when I told him the plot of the book, he was like, how do you know this about my life?
Before I continue with the love story, I do as a sidebar on Wyeth himself as a character, and you've given him a pretty harsh background emotionally. No one had ever held Wyeth's hand. No one had ever comforted him. I mean, the lack of affection does echo some of your own experience. His black father is not in the picture, and his mother, who's white, has essentially abandoned him to create a new life for herself with another man's children. Why did you want to deal him this particularly tough hand of cards? And what is being biracial, and what's the effect of it on him?
Eleanor, that's a good question. I hadn't thought of it like that. I was just freestyling, honestly. I knew that I wanted to write a character who was biracial because I hadn't done that before.
Is that the only reason?
That will get you far. That will get you far. I knew that I wanted to write a biracial character. And so then I started thinking about the particular dimensions of his life. But there was a version of this book that didn't have any backstory in it at all. And it was really my editor who, when he read the first draft of the book, he was like, we need to know more about him. And I was like, that is not necessary. That's because I think of myself as like a very French novelist, and the French don't do backstory. And I was like, they haven't since the 19th century. Like the last French novelist to do backstory was Emile Zola. The rest of them don't do that. But then I decided I needed to sort of know more about my character, and that's where the grandfather came in, and that's where the stuff about Wyeth's mother came in. And by the time I'd done I did the grandfather before I did the mother. And so then it's like, well, if he's going to be biracial, I've accidentally given him a black grandfather, so he needs a white mother. And then when I was writing about the mother, I thought, what is she doing now these days? And I was like, she probably got her act together. And then I thought, she got her act together and moved to California, where she's now a mommy blogger / trad wife. I wrote her before I knew about trad wives. If I'd been writing it now, she'd be a trad wife 100%. And so the mother arrived pretty late in the process of the book. But by then I already knew that he had this strange childhood. And mostly I was thinking about my own childhood, but a very narrow segment of that childhood, which was these horrible trips we would have to take to visit my aunts. And so I built his childhood sort of out of that. But there's also these other ways in which, like, his mother is sort of a bad mother, but his aunts take care of him, but in like a malicious way, like they sort of, when he goes to visit his cousins, they like scrub him really hard so they can comment on how bad his mother is at bathing him and all of this other stuff. And when they ask about, is there food in the house, it's always to insult his mother in a way. And so like even the affection he receives is very charged in a way.
Yeah, critical.
Yeah.
How does Wyeth's being of mixed race affect him, do you think? I mean, you said you wanted to write a biracial character because you'd never written one before.
Yeah. Well, I think it's being biracial in America is really interesting because there are many different ways to be biracial. There are all of these memes in America about being biracial, having a white mom versus a black mom is like a really sort of very drastically different experiences. I think I wanted to write about a character who was a lot like my biracial cousins, who, because of the particular makeup of my family, they were mostly, fathered by like my uncles or my great uncles with white women. And so I watched a lot of those kids grow up, and I saw that they were, for the most part, raised like black people, even though they were sort of growing up with white siblings or in white contexts and stuff like that. But I feel like in another way, though, like maybe race isn't the predominant aspect of Wyatt's life so much as class. Like I think class determines a lot of his life. Like he and his mother live in a trailer park, and she sometimes does sex work to support him. And so much of his difficulties have to do with class and with money. And it really isn't until he leaves the South that race begins to operate in like a much louder way in his life. And I think
because he even goes to, sorry to interrupt, now you're going to think I'm a New Yorker. He even goes to a black school because the black school is better.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. He goes to because the black school is better than the sort of poor white school, right? And so for him, I think class is so important. And I think sometimes when people think about, especially the South in America, they think that it's just about race, but a lot of that is like about class as well. And so for Wyeth, I think the primary experience of his childhood is mediated via class, I think, instead of race, because his mom has no money and his grandparents and aunts have more money than they do, and they're black, and his mom's white. But when he goes out into the broader world, then it becomes much more about race and how race is mediated sometimes through class and through all this other stuff. And so I find that really interesting, the intersection of race and class, especially for biracial people living in a sort of mixed South.
Although it's interesting, a very good friend of his, Bernard, says to him, I don't know why, sometimes you really are so Caucasian.
Yeah. I think Bernard is my favorite character.
But he means it sort of culturally. And I can imagine somebody saying that to you, for example, because of your reference points.
And they do. And of course, like when he says that to him, what he really means is you were so middle class, like you were so bourgeois. But for Bernard, the way that he mediates that is to call Wyeth Caucasian.
Yeah. Sure. You've said that you feel in some ways you had to break with the writer you were in order to write this book, or maybe you became the writer you wanted to be in order to write it. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so what happened is I got into the theory, guys. I got into the theory. I started reading literary criticism, and it made me aware of all the ways that I was a bad novelist before. And it was really hard to unsee. It was really hard to unsee. And in order to write this book, it felt like I needed a degree of historical specificity and a degree of attention to class and social dynamics that I hadn't quite been able to pull off in my previous works. I think it required a more ambitious and holistic social vision. I needed to know where I was writing this book from. I think in my other books, at the level of technique, I had a very keen sense of where I was writing that book from. But in terms of spiritually and historically, and like in terms of my Weltanschauung, my worldview, I feel like I was really naive and I didn't really know, or I didn't even think of it. And so with this book, I had to become a novelist in essence, right? I had to be able to say this book is articulating a particular view upon the world, and it's capable of seeing different aspects and different segments of society and holding them all together at once. And so it required, I guess, like, I think of it as like growing up and putting on my big boy pants as a novelist and not just writing a really insular book about one little guy's like sad gay emotions. Like this book, to be clear, this book has much of that, but it is also, I think, like a mature articulation of what it is to be alive at this particular moment on a particular set of streets in New York City. It has a historical consciousness that I think that wasn't present in my other work. And it required just like a lot of suffering to write it. Not that I had to personally suffer, but just like writing it was so hard because I had to really dig down and find like to really find that worldview. Like, what is my worldview that I want to write this book from? What do I believe as a novelist? What do I think as a novelist? And those are questions that I had not really been forced to articulate before in my previous books. So this, I feel like in many ways, this is the first book I wrote on purpose. And it was really hard. It was really hard to do.
But I didn't think it was just reading critical theory. I thought it was Zola.
Well, yeah,
did it, 'cause
Zola.
You were reading mega quantities of Emile Zola, all 20 novels of Le Rougon Macquart, the cycle.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
What inspiration? I mean,
Well,
can we blame him?
Okay, yes. Well, so walk with me on this. So a crazy thing happens when you read 20 books by one author. It's like you don't know where you stop and they begin. You don't know where they stop and you begin. And in Zola, it changed my life reading those 20 novels, in part because Zola is the master of fusing the social with the personal and finding the sort of drama in it and dramatizing it with like really elaborate, sometimes brutal plots. He's perhaps the greatest influence on me, I think, in a lot of ways. But also just like as a technician, he has these incredible passages of virtuosic description. Like when he's describing, for example, in Germinal, where he's describing the cages going up and down the mine shafts, and he's describing the way that the cables fly, and he like likens them to bats squealing. Like it's incredible. And so in writing this book, there were moments where I caught myself just like stopping and painting a Zola-esque panorama of a thing or an environment. And I was like, there's Emile. There's Emile. But I do think like he was a really heavy influence on me just because I read those 20 books, and then like you just can't outrun that kind of deep spiritual dying. But I think he also gave me permission to sort of lean into the social, to write a novel with a kind of social consciousness about it. Of course, like not preachy, but that was able to say, hello, this is society. Do you see it? And was able to offer moments of seeing society in miniature, right? Like in some ways, like this book is about a group of like arty gays in Manhattan, but in each of them, I think, is an encapsulation of a type that everybody will know and recognize, right? In the same way that when we read Jane Austen, we haven't all been genteel British lay people, right? But we all know mothers like Mrs. Bennet. Like we all know lazy, useless fathers like Mrs. Bennet. We all know a Lydia, right? Like we all know these types. And so I think in this book, even though you may not have been an art assistant or a curator or whatever, but you know people like Bernard, and you know people like Wyeth and like Keating. Like these people are real and alive. And I don't think I would have been able to do that had I not, drowned in Zola. He's really good. I do recommend him. He's so amazing.
You began by saying how happy you were to be in Montreal, and you were, when I extended the invitation, you were very eager to come because you said you've always wanted to come to Montreal. Is it because it's Mavis Gallant, one of your favorite writers' hometown?
I think she is my favorite writer, period, my favorite writer. And it is because it is her hometown. I was saying this last night to people for the event last night that like I've never been to Montreal, but it has figured so prominently in my imagination. And because of her stories and because of her life. And I've spent perhaps a disproportionate amount of time thinking about Montreal. I've perhaps thought about Montreal more than I've even thought about New York City.
How do you think her work has influenced you?
Oh, I mean, the fact that I let my characters say really cutting things to each other is for sure one of the hallmarks. But I think her fluidity of reference, the way that she skirts from high-mindedness to humor, the sort of languorousness of her scenes, which spill and spill out. She doesn't seem to be constrained by plot. Like plot seems so beside the point of many of her stories. Which in some ways makes them feel a lot like life. Some of her stories feel like really extended anecdotes, and just when you're afraid that you don't know how it's going to come together, it like snaps into shape, and you're like, oh, now I'm here with heartbreak that I didn't know was coming, right? And so her stories always feel like life to me, and anytime I sit down to write, I'm trying to do what she does, which is to write scenes and conversations that take these surprising turns and which seem like they could happen in my own life and in my own my own memory. I think about her all the time. She's always with me, Mavis.
It's so good to see you again. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks,
I also
guys.
want to thank the Cole Foundation for supporting this event, as well as big thanks to Cameron Charlebois and Catherine Dalziel for sponsoring my series, the Eleanor Wachtel series at Blue Met. I want to mention that if you'd like to hear my earlier interviews with Brandon Taylor, including discussions of his books, Real Life and Filthy Animals, the entire archive of CBC Radio's Writers and Company, more than 1,000 original episodes, is freely accessible to anyone, anywhere, no ads. The complete collection is available in partnership with Simon Fraser University Library. Just Google Writers and Company Archive, SFU Library, Digital Collections. There's some bookmarks, which I'm going to put at the books, right just behind here in the bookstore. And thanks so much to Brandon Taylor for joining us here in Montreal. You're all invited to continue the conversation at the book signing right over there.
Yeah, thanks, guys.